Okay, alrighty. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by Hearing Loss Association of America, also known as HLAA. The title of this presentation is What Nelson Mandela and Others Teach Us About Coping with the Coronavirus Pandemic and Isolation. Our presenter today is Dr. Michael Harvey, a practicing psychologist from Framingham, Massachusetts. My name is Carla Byers-Smolin and I am the National Chapter and Membership Coordinator for HLAA. The mission of HLAA is to open the world of communication to people with hearing loss, providing information, education, support, and advocacy. HLAA provides people with hearing loss the tools for self-help and advocates for the needs of people who have hearing loss, and promotes the understanding, nature, causes, and complications, and ways to address hearing loss. We offer educational information on many aspects of hearing loss, from technological and medical advances to coping strategies, hearing-assistive technology, and more. HLAA provides a wide range of local and national programs and events, such as the Walk for Hearing. We also have a nationwide network of chapters around the country that offer peer support, education, and advocacy in local communities. Please see our website, hearingloss.org, for resources on hearing loss and information on HLAA events, especially the Walk for Hearing schedule and local chapter listings. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our card provider, Whitney Riley. Thank you, Whitney, for providing captions for this service for this webinar. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This will allow you to type a question that we will be able to address at the end of Dr. Harvey's presentation. We are joined today by Dr. Michael Harvey. Dr. Harvey is a psychologist with a private practice in Framingham, Massachusetts. He provides training and consultation on mental health issues having to deal with hearing loss, including consultation and training for audiologists regarding motivational interviewing and psychological aspects of patient care. As a clinical psychologist, he was on the faculty at Salish University, where he taught online courses relating to the psychosocial aspects of hearing loss. He has published more than 50 articles in the field, and his latest books are Listen with the Heart, Relationships and Hearing Loss, and The Odyssey of Hearing Loss, Tales of Triumph. Dr. Harvey is a regular contributor to HLA's magazine, Hearing Life, and a popular presenter at HLA conventions. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Harvey. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, I don't see it yet, but okay. So here we are. Can everybody hear me or see me, the captions? I think we're okay. Anyway, we never thought we'd be here, did we? So maybe this weekend one of us will go to the bedroom, to the living room, whatever. When I thought of isolation, of course, I thought of Nelson Mandela, who was isolated in a 8-foot by 7-foot cell for 27 very long years. And I suspect he could have taught us, and still can, something about isolation. And the two things that Mandela mentioned that were critical to his survival, his psychological survival, his physical survival, was sensing himself, experiencing himself as part of a community, a collective, a group of people who shared a vision, and also adhering to a regular routine. So I think I'd like to talk about those two a bit now. That is, if I can get the slide to work. Okay. So as Barbara Streisand also said, people need people, right? Social networking, of course, comes to mind. FaceTime and texting, we're all familiar with. I had one person contact me the other day. She was looking forward to having what she called a Zoom dinner with her sister so they could socialize. When I told my daughter I was giving a workshop in isolation, she said, okay, Dad, why don't you just tell people to watch Netflix movies with someone? And I told her, you can't do that, Emily. She said, oh, Dad. So she told me all about something called Netflix Extension Party, which of course I know nothing about. Kids know a lot about this tech stuff. But Google that and you'll find out about that. And of course, HLAA forums and chat groups. And by the way, webinars, all ways of connecting with people. It reminds me, by the way, before we get to this, I was with my two daughters, I don't know, 10 years ago, and I was talking with some peers, you know, who were about 65, my age back then. And I heard one daughter say to the other, you know, it's good that they're with their own kind. So we need to be with our own kind, particularly during this point in time. So now you're going to see a wonderful kind of video of, you know, what many Italians did a couple weeks ago when they were on lockdown. They were singing to each other from their balconies to lift their spirits. Now, Carlo's going to do this part of it, I think. That's the next slide.
Sorry, 1 second, just bear with me.
Chi nascerà verbena, viva la nostra sera, viva la nostra sera, nella piazza del campo, chi nascerà verbena, viva
That's enough. Go back to the beginning. Okay.
Okay,
I don't have control yet.
okay, all right, 1 second, okay. Okay, Dr. Harvey, 1 second. I just need to do something real quick.
Okay.
Okay. You have control now.
Okay, it doesn't work yet. I don't have control yet.
Okay. Try again.
Let me click on this again here.
Okay.
Okay, that was pretty interesting. So another person who I suspect knows something about isolation is Anthony Ray Hinton. This is a wonderful, wonderful book, a very important book. Believe it or not, both a very sad and inspirational story. He was on death row for 28 years in a cell. And he illustrates the principle that you don't need to talk with real people in order to avoid feeling isolated. So let me read to you what he did during his 12th year of imprisonment. I married Halle Berry on a Sunday. It was a beautiful wedding, and she wore a slim white dress made up of the finest lace, hand sewn in Paris by 100 seamstresses. She looked up to me, her big brown eyes shining with tears that threatened to spill over as I gazed at her radiance. A few months later, I had to divorce Halle Berry for Sandra Bullock. I had seen the movie Speed, and I thought Sandra would be good to have in case I ever busted out of death row and needed a getaway driver. Halle didn't take it well, but I think it was for the best. And then he writes later in his book, I don't have control of the slide anymore. This thing doesn't work. Okay. The guards knew not to disturb me for an hour because I was having lunch with Queen Elizabeth. Now let me show you another slide. Anyone remember this movie, Castaway, starring Tom Hanks? His plane crashes on an island, and he invents somebody to talk to, okay? Because otherwise, he would experience what psychologists call fragmentation, sort of the loss of our identity, the loss of who we are. He invented a person named Wilson who was a volleyball. And he talks to Wilson and imagines Wilson talking back to him. Astronauts, by the way, are taught to do this. When they go into outer space, they talk to the mission control, often, yes, to exchange information, etc. But often they talk to mission control, who talks back to them just to not be psychologically isolated, not to be fragmented in terms of their sense of self. So this is really important. The other thing Mandela and others teach us during times of isolation is to create a schedule, routine, structure, and more structure. Mandela, for example, exercised at the same time every day. You could tell the time by the sun. Hinton wrote in his journal roughly at the same time every day. And they both commented, what the heck is the difference? It doesn't matter what time I do it. I have all the time in the world. But the predictability, the routine, the sense of structure was very, very helpful. And that's something we can do as well. Many of you have seen this movie, The Birdman of Alcatraz. He was imprisoned for what, 60 years? And he occupied himself by learning about birds. He became a nationally known expert on birds, ornithology. Again, structure and routine. Now, with isolation, people may become more aware of their tinnitus. For example, I am working with a teacher who has tinnitus, and he's very, very busy at school, until, and he didn't hardly notice his ringing in his ears at school. Now that there's no more school and he's home doing nothing, he notices it more. My colleague, Douglas Beck, talks about the 80-80 rule. Approximately 80% of all people with sensory neural hearing loss have tinnitus, and approximately 80% of all people with tinnitus have sensory neural hearing loss. And the three most important words in pain management, including tinnitus, is distraction, distraction, and distraction. So let's talk about ways of distracting ourselves. We can distract ourselves with things that we can control. So there's another book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who talks about marching at Auschwitz, terrified, feeling out of control, and he coped by wiggling certain fingers in a certain order. Sometimes you start with his first finger, then his thumb, sometimes his thumb, then his first finger, then his fourth finger. On a non-psychological level, who the heck cares? What difference does this make? On a psychological level, however, as he writes about in his book, it gave him a sense of control. It gave him sort of exercising personal agency, what he was able to control in an environment that was very uncontrollable. Many of us, if not all of us, remember what we were doing that Tuesday of 9/11. That afternoon, I felt a compulsion to weed my garden. And I knew why I was doing it, even while I was, fixing the basil, the tomatoes, because it didn't really matter to 9/11, to the Twin Towers, but it gave me a sense of doing something that I had control over. And we cannot control the coronavirus anymore, but the trick is to find out what we're able to control in our environment, simply to give us that sense of empowerment. Many people are organizing or reorganizing our home. Carl Jung, a psychiatrist, disciple of Sigmund Freud, he said that home, the symbol for oneself is one's home. Often when you give kids a psychological test, you ask them to draw a house. And often the more details they draw in the house relates to how they feel about themselves, their own self-esteem. But so it's powerful stuff. So organizing your home is a good thing to do. One person wrote me that she's alphabetizing her spice rack. I got this from the library, the local library. Library is always open online to keep your mind fresh during this difficult time. This is real important, to limit your exposure to catastrophic news. And when you watch the news today, most of it, of course, is potentially catastrophic. Yes, we should watch the news enough to be informed, to know what to do, to know how to take care of ourselves and avoid danger. But if most people, if not all people, stay glued to the news, which changes every hour, every half hour, we are likely to have some huge panic symptoms and anxiety, and it throws gas in the anxiety fire, so to speak. There's already a lot of talk about coining a new psychological syndrome called anxiety disorder from exposure to news. So balance, balance, and balance. Exercise is important, of course. Many people are they can't go to the gym anymore, so they make part of their house their exercise room. On YouTube, there's channels that you can do exercises with people. Don't sweat the small stuff. This is not the time to lecture your kids about, finishing your homework before watching TV. I had one kid say, I hate this isolation stuff, but my mom is finally letting me have ice cream before dinner. So don't sweat the small stuff right now. That's my advice. And let's talk about time. Those of us who have taken a long trip, cross country perhaps, know that the first 5 days go quicker than the last 2 or 3 hours, because the last 2 or 3 hours we're expecting to get there soon, and time goes significantly slower. So, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, right? We can hope that this ends in a week or two, but let's not let our mind expect it, because then time goes much slower and we suffer much more psychologically. So I can imagine some of you saying, Mike, you provided some ways to occupy our time, but with all due respect, we older folks in the so-called vulnerable population are afraid of dying from this virus. How the heck do we not worry about that? So I gave myself a few minutes to think about that, because that's a very tough question. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. So I have some thoughts. Some recommendations. First, whatever you do, don't feel like you're a wuss for being afraid of getting sick or even dying. Again, it's impossible to listen to the statistics, watch the news without being afraid. Everybody, including me, when we're coughing, when we're short of breath, maybe we ran across the street too fast. Oh my God, I have it, I have it, I have it. I'm gonna die, what if? Just know that this is a normal reaction. In fact, we're all being traumatized in a way, and the definition of trauma is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. What's happening around us is abnormal. No one expected this. A normal reaction is to feel scared and traumatized. Now, one way to make a thought more powerful, if we're afraid of something, the way to make it more powerful is never think about it. So for the next 5 minutes, I don't want anybody in this webinar to think of a pink elephant. I said, don't think of a pink elephant. It's hard, you can't do it, right? You try not to think about it and you think about it. So the way to make it worse is to prevent any thought of that. The way to make it better is we'll talk about mindfulness in a minute, is to kind of, when the thought comes, let it pass like a cloud. Don't dwell on it, let it pass like a cloud. I learned this in high school, actually, in a very different context. I was going steady with Sue when I was in high school. And oh my God, it was 5 weeks, wonderful weeks. She was gonna, we're gonna get married, have 2.5 children, have a white picket fence. And you know what? A week before that Pantherama dance in high school, 500 kids were going, she broke up with me. And I was devastated. End of my life as I knew it. Didn't know about coronavirus back then, so I didn't have a lot to be anxious about. So the task was how to cope with being in the same room as Sue for those 5 long hours with 500 kids. What I did, in the wisdom of my time, was to make sure that not for an iota of a second would I look in her direction, would I glance in her direction. Now I ask you, given that I made darn sure never to look in her direction, who must I have noticed the most that whole evening? Obviously, Sue. What I could have, should have, would have done is use mindfulness techniques. If I happen to glance in her direction, just let it pass. Don't dwell on it, just let it pass like a cloud. I would have been much happier. So let's talk about mindfulness for a minute to create distance from thoughts. This example on the screen is one thought, I'm not good enough. Use this as an example. Now there's a very important but subtle difference with the, what you can do is rather than I'm not good enough, thinking that, I notice that I'm having a thought that I'm not good enough. You see the difference here? It creates a sort of separation from the person who's doing the thinking from the thought. So we can talk about the fear of dying, just to cut to the chase. I'm afraid of dying is kind of all, it takes over, right? It's this one big, we're afraid of dying. That's all we think about. Versus, I notice that I'm having a thought that I'm afraid of dying. It creates a separation between the I or the me and thoughts and feelings. I have thoughts and feelings that I notice, but I am not those thoughts or feelings. The other visual image which you might want to conjure up is you have a mountain with a bunch of changing weather patterns around it, changing cloud patterns. The mountain is oneself. The cloud patterns and changing weather are thoughts. Again, to separate ourselves from what we think or what we're afraid of. Now, again, these are kind of mind games or cognitive tools, really, we can use to simply notice that we're having a thought that we are scared versus succumbing to fears. So that's kind of an 8-week course in mindfulness in about 3 or 4 minutes. I hope it's clear, but I'll look forward to questions and comments about that. Look, this is sort of a cliche. We're all feeling vulnerable and we're all thinking anxious thoughts and the what ifs. And the flip side of that is we smell the flowers. We know what's really important. We appreciate the small things. There was a very interesting study, for example, I don't know, 30-something years ago, when people were not living with AIDS, but were dying with AIDS, HIV. And there was one study that was very interesting. There was one group that received an HIV positive diagnosis. Another group received HIV negative, so they were not diagnosed as having AIDS. On some measures of depression, the HIV positive group were much less depressed than the HIV positive group. The HIV negative group, I'm sorry. And the question, of course, was why? And one person explained it beautifully. Look, I know I'm going to die now. I have AIDS. I now can smell the roses, appreciate what I have, live, as Woody Allen put it, live each day as if it was your last, and one of these days you'll be right. How's that for an uplifting thought? But it's a cliche, but it's important. And many of us are sort of appreciating this cliche more now. Another question comes up. One person asked me, praying helps me a lot, probably more than anything else. So why in God's name don't you recommend that on this webinar? And indeed, for many people, practicing their spiritual beliefs, like prayer, is quite helpful and quite powerful. In fact, all the research on dealing with crises speaks of the immense power of spirituality and of group support. So in fact, there's, I don't know, the last 10 years, many articles are coming out. One was entitled, Spirituality Makes Rounds at Mass General Hospital. In other words, doctors are now talking with patients about spirituality because of the immense power of it. However, so again, if you have spiritual beliefs, this is the time to use them. But again, there is no one size fits all. I am not implying for a second that one has to have a specific spiritual belief or one has to have any spiritual beliefs at all. That's simply one of many tools people can use to cope if it fits their view. Okay? So, I came across this study. Palestinian adults and children also know what it's like to deal with fear, with isolation, being stuck in their homes, waiting for the next bomb to go off right by them. And they were asked, how do you cope? And the kids actually gave these responses, which are very interesting. Make sure you have times to be together and laugh, talk together, invent games that make you laugh and help you breathe, keep studying, this is a good way to fight, and eat olives. The olive tree is the tree of peace. So the question that I think we should all be asking ourselves is, what is our version of olives? You know, what's really special that we could do, given that we have all this time, given that we don't know how long this is going to last, given that we're scared, you know, that one person's making their favorite recipes. So what is your version of olives? Humor goes a long way too. This is one of my favorite cartoons. Grandpa, tell us again about the great toilet paper famine of 2020. That's been circulating online. So we would love to make this end. We would like to make this end as soon as possible. People are trying, but that's not going to happen for a while. Given that we can't change it, what are the psychological benefits? So I'll read and discuss a few things people have said. I discovered in myself strength and resiliency that I never thought I had. I resolved things with my estranged father because you never know what could happen. I'm allowing myself to get enough rest finally. People are discovering naps. It doesn't feel good, I know, but it feels more real to get in touch with our vulnerability, like with 9/11. No one likes this feeling of vulnerability. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't feel that way? But we all kind of, as many people talk about, it feels more honest, more real, more in touch with reality. Because of isolation from my usual activities, I've learned to appreciate basic things more. And finally, from a paint store owner, my sales are up 25%. I will never forget when I saw Christopher Reeve lecture from his wheelchair, who was paralyzed, and he talked about something he wrote in his autobiography, which came out probably 10, 15 years ago. He would sit still, because he couldn't move, in front of a window for hours and hours and hours. And he said, I never really noticed clouds the way I do now, how they move, what they look like. Again, he could change, if he could change his situation, he would do so in a heartbeat, but he couldn't. So he found things to appreciate more. This is an interesting comment from an adult with hearing loss. In a way, now I'm less isolated in quarantine because I don't have to feel lost in a crowd of unintelligible noise. Everything is accessible to me via text or one-to-one communication at 6 feet. So, she doesn't have to be in a huge party environment where she can't understand things, because parties are no longer, at least not for now. So let's see. I want to say one more thing, and then I'm going to hopefully have some questions, and we'll do some discussing. So I can talk for hours, but I don't want to. I want to go back to something. Right before I saw Chris Reeve talk, I saw Mitch Albom, who wrote a book called Tuesdays with Murray. And if those of you who have not read this book, please do, because it's a very uplifting book, even though it's about a man who is dying from neurofibromatosis type 2, the elephant man disease, which renders his body decaying with his mind remaining intact. And Mitch Albom, his student, visited him often, and one day he asked Murray, I don't get it. When I see you, you're dying this horrible death, but you're eating good food and laughing and telling jokes with your friends. What's going on here? Don't you ever get sad? And Murray said something which I think was very instructive. He said, yeah, most of the time I wake up every morning at 5 a.m. I cry for about 20 minutes. I give it its due. And then I move on. And it seems to me this piece of wisdom has a lot of applicability to our present situation, when we may be happy and laughing with friends and joking and, joking about buying stock in toilet paper company or whatever. And then all of a sudden we're succumbed with fear, with dread. What if? It's okay to, quote, give it its due and move on. It's important to talk about it, to not make believe. We're not scared, we're not isolated, we're not depressed, but allow it to kind of come up when it does, wave to it mindfully, observe yourself thinking about it, feeling it, discuss it with friends, with colleagues, with peers, so it won't take over your life. So let's see if there are any questions. I'm going to click my Q&A button. And let's see. I have one question from Ann. I am in self-isolation and have never felt so free. Listening to the birds, watching growth in the trees, etc. Also smelling the flowers. is now recognized as a sign of the virus. Oh, wow. No smell is one of the first signs. Isolation means I have no sense of the outside world and am keeping to my own daily routine. So isn't it interesting that once all the distractions of life, work, going to crowded places, shopping, etc., sort of go away, listening to the birds, watching growth in the trees becomes a very cherished activity. Thanks, Ann. Any other questions or comments? I'm scrolling and I don't see any, but you can feel free to ask. What I want to do is also read you a poem that got circulated online, which is also speaks to the yin and yang of the situation, the yin being the yucky part and the yang being the benefits. And again, any more questions, share them, and I'll talk about that afterwards. This poem's being circulated online, Pandemic it's called. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up just for now on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has become clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we shall all live. It's an amazing poem, isn't it? We are having some more questions here. From Vicky, many times in the busy world I have said, I wish the world would just stop or slow down just for a little while. Now it has, and I can catch up and enjoy a certain peace. It's an amazing paradox, isn't it? Amazing paradox. There was a study of the psychological development of older adults, ages 40 to 80, by a psychologist, Valence, I think his name was. He came up with a very interesting sentence in his book. Wisdom is the ability to hold a paradox. It's not black or white anymore. This is an awful, terrifying time. The world has, in essence, stopped or slowed down. Now I can enjoy a certain peace. The terror and the peace go together. Question, will your slides be available on the website or in some other way? Yes, they will. Carla can tell you about that. Mary says, I hope the whole world takes a deep breath and calms down. We need to stop being so angry and distressed. I hope so too. This was a wonderful webinar. Will you be hosting any other webinars similar to this? Ask Carla. I'm happy to do this. I was gonna say, by the way, when I was talking about the idea of talking to imaginary people as a way to cope with isolation. When Barbara Kelly asked me to do this webinar, it was originally scheduled for noon, but I had a lunch date with Matt Damon, who, by the way, sends his regards. Elaine, any advice for those of us quarantined with kids who are driving us crazy? Oh, yes. Well, if I was with you as an audience, I would ask, what do all of you think is a way of buying some time? Well, I do know. One client of mine, for Christmas, the kids wanted, well, I forgot what it's called, those virtual reality games, Xbox or whatever, and said, no, it's too expensive, it's too expensive. And now he wishes he had bought them, because this is a time, if your kids want to play video games, TV, for God's sake, let them. That's one way. It's a win-win. It helps you and it helps them be occupied. Now, kids absolutely may act up or act out, become angry, become sullen, become irritable, obstinate, because they're scared. So if you kind of can say to your kids, look, you can't throw ice cream on the walls. Can you tell us, mom and dad, how you're feeling? You might be scared. You know, parents often, we try to prevent kids from watching the news or learning about what's going on in the world. Most of the time, 98.8% of the time, dream on, parents. It doesn't work. So kids overhear things that terrify them, and often kids don't have the emotional, psychological, or even neurological equipment to deal with it in helpful ways. So they act out, they become, they misbehave. So to the extent that you can sit down with them and say, look, I know you're scared. It's okay to be scared. We're all together. Let's play a game. Let's have fun. We'll watch TV. You can make your favorite thing, cookies in the oven. Again, how the Palestinian children coped, you eat olives and at a symbolic level. So that's my advice about kids. Another question. I love these questions. I'm always afraid there'll be no discussion, but this is wonderful. Bernadette, hi. What do you suggest we do when our health professionals do not supply us with captioning or video remote interpreters? I have to admit, I don't know. Now you advocate to do all the things you know how to do. I don't know. Let me think about that. Wonderful information, anonymous. Thank you. Do you have any advice for balancing self-care with reaching out to help meet the many needs of those around us? Yeah, there's many of us, remember when we used to fly airplanes and the flight attendant comes up and says, if you have a child and the oxygen mask comes down, for God's sakes, give yourself the oxygen first before giving the oxygen to the child. Because if you don't give yourself enough oxygen first, you're not able to help anybody. You're going to lose consciousness. So it seems to me the first thing we need to do to help people is to take care of ourselves. One client asked me a question. He wasn't being sarcastic, actually. He said, Mike, can you tell me the research? Well, wait a minute. A therapy hour, if you go to a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, a therapy hour is typically 45 or 50 minutes, not an hour. And the person asked, what's the research behind 45 or 50 minutes as opposed to the whole 60 minutes? And I said, there's no research, guy. Therapists need a break. I have 10 minutes between people to take care of myself so I can take care of others. So don't be shy or hesitant to do whatever you need to do. Step back, breathe, notice your breathing, meditate. All that self-care stuff is so critical. And I don't think you can really help people effectively if you don't first take care of yourself. I'll tell you another quick story that this one helper in a crisis looked so distressed when she was helping other people, that the people wouldn't ask her for help, and or they felt guilty because, oh my God, she's helping me and look at her. So, listen, to that other question from Bernadette, I don't know the answer to that, except I can thoroughly appreciate your dilemma. But to get groups of people to say it out loud to the newspapers, to the institution, you know, there's power in numbers that, hey, look, this is unfair. We need information as much as anybody else. This is isolating enough without having to do all the advocacy by yourself. An anonymous attendee has a fear of being in the hospital and not being able to understand what doctors or nurses are saying. Any advice? When any patient goes to any doctor, the patient grows down. You know, you hear the expression grow up. The patient grows down, meaning we become anxious and we lose our ability to advocate. That's a very common phenomenon, sometimes called the, I'm blocking on it right now, when our pulse rate increases at the doctor's office, white coat syndrome. It's really important to have somebody else or a few other people whom we trust to be with us when we go to a doctor's appointment, and if you go to the hospital, because those other people don't have the same growing downness, if you will, that you will have and could advocate a lot more effectively and a lot more vocally. I really appreciate these questions. Lauren says, for me, there is a sense of disbelief, not denial, but something so real now seems unreal. It's almost the opposite of psychosis when unreal seems real. This sort of disbelief is unsettling and confusing. What do you think? I think you said it beautifully. We are in shock still. This is what's going on here. It's surreal, right? It's not psychosis when we confuse reality and unreality. You know, we're hearing terms like the new normal. I don't think I've ever heard the term social distancing before a week or two ago. Have you? This is, you know, this is kind of Kafka-esque. It's unreal, and that's, and talking about it in this way, like we are doing here, creates a sense of validation, which then helps us feel like we're all in this together and we feel more secure. Because there's nothing worse, right, than having this feeling of disbelief, of shock, of surrealism, being isolated, because then people think, oh, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. We are all in this surreal environment that changes every hour. So I think you said it beautifully. Thank you so much for that. Deb says, those who have a mental illness like depression, these would be hard to think about anything, as it is hard to control depression. What is your suggestion to those people? Well, this is the time to use all the resources you have, you utilize therapy. Therapy, by the way, this is interesting, is used to be mostly conducted face-to-face in the therapist's office. And insurance companies were very hesitant to authorize or condone teletherapy, therapy online through Skype, through FaceTime, through all the platforms, Zoom. Now, virtually every insurer, almost every insurer, including Medicare, by the way, is authorizing teletherapy. So those of you who have a serious psychological problem on top of what's going on, therapists are absolutely available to meet with you, if for not any other context, online. I find times of anger when watching live broadcasts. Most are signed but not captioned. I am not ASL literate. I feel left out and I have to struggle or fight to find out the information. That adds to the isolation. Yeah, it adds to anger as well, doesn't it? Right? It's people who have hearing loss talk about this a lot, by the way, in other contexts. I have people tell me versions of what's hard is not being able to understand the certain situations, you know, audiograms, this and that, but that is not anywhere near as hard as the insensitivity of some people, right? And it's one thing to kind of bear witness to those who have the ability to be comforting and supportive, but who, for whatever reason, choose not to. That adds significantly to the isolation and to the anger and to the helplessness. And again, the not antidote to it, but the helpfulness. It would be helpful, again, not to hold all these feelings inside by yourself, but to get together and talk about it. I'll give you a free association. There's a very famous trauma clinic in Chicago, and these therapists worked with victims or survivors of horrific trauma, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, et cetera, et cetera. Every week, Wednesday at noon, the therapists would shut themselves in a room so nobody else could hear them, and they draw a picture of the abuser on the blackboard, and they yell at it. They'd scream at it, they'd swear at it, because again, bearing witness to yuckiness does a number on you, and it's absolutely essential to be part of a group. As my daughter said, it's good that they're with their own kind for support. Angela, for people who have little experience building their own routines and have depended on their work or community involvement to shape their own structure, do you have recommendations or resources for people to visit if the idea of building their own routine is overwhelming? Yeah, you get together with friends, online perhaps, and you say, listen, we don't quite know how to do this. Let's brainstorm. You know, let's create a schedule. What time are you going to have dinner? I don't know, sometime between 5 and 7 maybe, or when I get hungry. No, let's agree on a time to have dinner. Let's get real anal about this, because again, we cannot control the coronavirus right now, but we can control when we eat. Let's all, I have a group of friends, this is kind of interesting, who created a visual chat room, and they were all going to set their alarms and brush their teeth together. Now, who would have thought of that, right? So one guy came up with, let's brush our teeth together. It's terrifically funny, of course, but it also establishes a routine. And okay.
Dr. Harvey, I just need to remind you that 5 more minutes, okay?
Okay, good. Are you and your patients using telehealth during this crisis? I certainly am. I'll tell you just the long and short of that story. So I'm 67. For the first time in my career, I decided to go to Florida for 2 months. Okay, so I arrived in Florida, and then 2 months go by, and I was supposed to, you know where this is going, fly home next Saturday. But guess what? Guess where I'm going to be for the next month or 2 or 3. So I am doing telehealth with each and every patient in my practice. A few more minutes, a couple more questions. I was wondering if other people with hearing loss are finding it challenging to lip read healthcare professionals with the masks on. What would be some solutions if you needed to go to the hospital in terms of communication? That's a good question. I would probably use portable captioning devices, captioning apps come to mind, you know, on your iPhone or a smartphone. They have applications that can do that. Writing, of course, is the old standard way, but that would probably be one thing I would recommend. Erica asked, not pandemic related, but how do you suggest dealing with the uncertainty of how one's hearing loss may progress? You know, the Serenity Prayer comes to mind, doesn't it? Which I can't recite right now, but essentially the 12-step prayer: control what you can, don't control what you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. You know, obviously this is the time to talk to your audiologists, healthcare professionals about these questions to get the best information you can. And again, it's not going to eliminate the anxiety. And one thing you can say, this may sound very oversimplified and even ridiculous, but one standard treatment, if you will, for an anxiety disorder or panic is a person saying to him or herself, hey, this is only anxiety, it'll pass. It doesn't feel good to be anxious, but it's normal. And it can be talked about with people, and it will pass. So I want to thank all of you for helping me with my isolation, because, you know, when Barbara asked me to do this, after I worked around my plans with Damon for lunch, I was thrilled because it gave me something to focus on. I put together this, and it helped me with mine. So I thank you. I hope it has helped you as much as this has helped me. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oops. Sorry guys, trying to get the screen for contact information for Dr. Harvey. He did offer his email for questions that were not covered in this webinar. I want to see if I can get to the screen. Okay, there we go. This is Dr. Harvey's email. If you have questions that were not covered in this webinar, I will put my video back on. I want to thank you all for joining today. Dr. Harvey, thank you so much for your time today and for the wonderful and much needed presentation that we needed today. Today's webinar has been recorded, and we will be posting it on the HLA website at hearingloss.org. Be sure to visit hearingloss.org for information on future HLA webinars and events and resources on hearing loss. My thanks again to Whitney for captioning the webinar today, and to everyone for joining us today. Thank you again, Dr. Harvey. I wish everybody well in isolation, and please take words to heart. We are alone together. So hopefully we will continue to do more webinars in the future, and I hope you will be well and stay safe. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.